First, acknowledge the minority leader who's with us, Mark Pafford. Thank you for being here. I want to point out, too, that a couple years back, Mark was the lone vote. Unfortunately, he didn't have many folks standing with him, but he was the lone vote, the only nay vote of the amendments to the Everglades Forever Act. So appreciate your courage. True ally in these efforts. I also want to thank all of you for your vote in November on the historic passage of Amendment 1. And you should all be very pleased and congratulate you and your neighbors and friends for getting out there. 75% of Floridians set a mandate to Tallahassee. A clear mandate, the only mandate that came out of that evening. Extraordinary. That said, we, the people of this state, expect at least now a third of documentary tax receipts to go towards conservation, to go towards the environment, to go towards solving the problem along the St. Lucie Estuary and the Indian River Lagoon. Clear as day, 75%. And that voice has now been translated up I-95 to I-10 and head west and hit Tallahassee. And they've begun to have hearings about how we're going to fund and implement, how they will implement Amendment 1. And it is vital. It is vital that organizations, 74 organizations that make up this coalition, make your voices crystal clear to your legislators, whether it's Senator Negron, Representative Harrell, all the members of the Martin County delegation in particular, to say Amendment 1 funds need to go to solve this problem, to solve this estuary problem, to ensure that we stop wasting billions of gallons of water out to sea. You know, when I come up here and I stand before all of you, I feel like I'm at the College of Cardinals. I mean, you all know more about this topic than I do. I will admit that. One, because you lived it, and it affects your businesses, it affects your livelihood. It impacts the community that you cherish and that you love, and the community that you want to see survive and sustain itself. And it's not just the ecology. The ecology damage is important. We need to fix that for sure. And Paul Gray has been an extraordinary leader in explaining the ecological damage. But it's the economic hits that are killing us. The jobs that are lost. Mike Connor and his colleagues who are out there trying to make a living on the water, they're the ones who are suffering. And I don't know how many more dead fish we have to show, but we certainly can show fishermen. Fishermen who make a livelihood out on these waterways, who have to drive all the way down to the Keys, who have to take people out on Florida Bay because no one wants to go in a murky, toxic, polluted estuary or lagoon. This is the United States of America in 2015. And we're still dealing with this. I remember Sarah Hurd showed me last year an article from the Stuart News in 1934. And it was the county commission lamenting about the Lake Okeechobee discharges and the impact they were having. This is generational. This has been going on for decades. When are we going to say, let's roll up our sleeves and let's fix it? And as I was driving up here today from Miami, 2 hours in the car, I was trying to say, what am I going to tell these great folks? What am I going to tell them this morning that, one, they haven't already heard, or it's going to change their potential thinking? And I don't know if I can, but this is not complicated. I think we have 3 goals, collectively. First, we want to avoid the summer of 13. Simple as that. We want to avoid these lost summers. Number 2, we want to finish the C-44 project that was authorized and is underway. And it's been going on and on and on. And that's the problem with some of this stuff. That's why people say they have fatigue when it comes to the Everglades. We start a project, and because the funds are not allocated in an amount that actually speeds it up, it takes too long. And people get frustrated. And they get tired, and they say, when is this going to end? And it's the dollars. Clearly, we need the money. And the third thing I believe that collectively we agree is the water has to be sent south. It has to go south. And listen, since I was here last, and I remember being here in early 14, not speaking but attending. In just 1 year, We saw record funding out of Tallahassee, $259 million for Everglades and estuaries due to the lost summer of 13. We saw 4 new Everglades projects authorized by the United States Congress. So the next time someone tells you they don't do anything in Washington, they did on this. They passed a WRDA bill, the Water Resources Bill, that now has authorized 4 new projects, Everglades. We finally had the state of Florida endorse the Central Everglades Planning Project to allow for the infrastructure to be put in place so that water can move south. And we passed Amendment 1. 2014, as much as some of us may have been frustrated here and there, 2014 was a pretty successful year for the Everglades and the estuaries. But we can't let up. And if we become complacent on these short-term accomplishments or these goals that are achieved, then we lose the greater picture. We can't get so caught up in a short-term win. And wins are good, but this is a long-term effort. It took a generation to screw it up. It's going to take this generation to fix it. And I'm optimistic that we're going to pass it to the next generation to say, what we restore is now a perpetual investment. So the dollars will not end. So the amount of money, so those who are putting themselves up for office and those that serve in Tallahassee and in Washington, they need to realize that dollars do not end when we say we restored the Everglades. In fact, the dollars continue because it has to then be protected. We need to protect what we restored. So I go back to those 3 collective agreement points. Before I get into it, I want to acknowledge anybody can walk through the middle of a room during a presentation, but there's only one guy who can really get away with it. And that is Nathanial Reed. I have spent 12 years in politics, both in Washington and Tallahassee. And we don't have too many statesmen anymore. And I worked for a statesman. Clay Shaw, member of Congress, 26 years, he was a statesman. And he worked across the aisle. He had friends in the Democratic Party. Isn't that astonishing? He had friends who were Democrats. And he was principled. He voted the way he felt was important. They voted the way they did. But when it was over, they knew their families. They knew their children. They knew that politics had to bring both sides together for the benefit of the country. He was a statesman. Nathanial Reed is a statesman, serving both in Tallahassee and in Washington to make this, not only this community, but this country better. So thank you for your service. But let me say too, back to my drive up here. This is not complicated. This is not, as they say, rocket science. Let's not have group thought or group think and really delay it, because that's what some want us to do, is we want to all become distracted about the nuances of all of this and the details and miss the greater goal or the greater picture. If we want to send water south into the Everglades, you have to buy land. Simple as that. Simple as that. Now, you may say, okay, that's easier said than done. What are the solutions? And I'm not sitting in Tallahassee at the moment. I'm advocating for this ecosystem. I don't cast a vote. But the options, there are solutions on the table, and they should be considered. And if those options aren't where the state wants to go, well then come up with your own plan. Come up with a plan. There's smart people in Tallahassee, and they understand the problem. We need to send water south. We need to store water. We have to stop wasting billions of gallons of water out to sea. You have to hold it. You have to have enough quantity to sustain almost 20 million people, 8 million people who rely on the Everglades for drinking water. 8 million, a third of the state, rely on that swampy, mosquito-laden river of grass for water. And we're now the 3rd largest state in the country. California, Texas, Florida. We just passed New York. I don't know if anybody knew that, but we just passed New York in December. And based on the news this week with the snowstorm, we're expecting, the projections are 100 million tourists coming to Florida. It's wonderful. It's great. The economy, as long as they go home. And buying homes. But listen, that's the point. I was in Sandoval the other day and they said, how can we convince our friends in Boston and in Michigan and in Nebraska even why they should be engaged in this? And there was a couple answers that went a little longer than I would have, but here's the elevator, my view, the 8-second elevator response. If they bought a home, they want to protect their investment. And they don't want toxic algae in their waterways. That's why when this issue in 13 really was elevated is when the realtors stood up. And there's realtors in this room. They couldn't sell property. They couldn't sell homes because the issue was who in their right mind wants to buy a multi-million-dollar home with toxic algae. We got to fix this. We got to fix this. We have to be able to send lake water south. So that's the option on the screen. The option that's before the state today, again, something that should be considered, contemplated, reviewed, analyzed. It was negotiated. Many years and months spent to get to that point. Take it off the shelf, dust it off, and analyze it. It was analyzed ad nauseum by the South Florida Water Management District to the point where senior staff made comments that there's parts of this that are missing links. Missing links to ensure that we have enough water to remain on the peninsula. So, as you look at this map, and you're all familiar with it, the lights are going to come down a little bit so you can actually see the color difference. But the dark green triangles up to the east of the lake and down to the south, Southern Gardens, they were already purchased. The state bought that in 2010. The option that's before the state today, expiring in October, are the darker brown parcels. Okay, that's a total of 46,000 acres. I don't have a gadget here to point it out, but I'll point right quickly. This right here, that piece, that's roughly 26,000 acres. That's right there that's the missing link that the district they publicly stated. If that land was purchased, that is an ideal spot to begin the effort to build a reservoir and to hold water. Dynamic storage. Dynamic storage, I've heard this and I understand it. Because building a reservoir does not mean the water's going to stay there. The water has to be moved south, but it has to come off the lake. And if you build a deep water reservoir on that site, our hydrologist, this is not Eric Eikenberg, who has served a number of years in politics and in policy telling you this. These are hydrologists. These are people that do this for a living, who sit in front of computers and model. I don't know what the heck they're doing, and nor do I can understand it, but they do it constantly to figure out how can we get the water flow into the central part of the Everglades so that we're maximizing the quantity of water. And they would say that if that land was purchased, you could build that reservoir, a deep water reservoir, a foot of lake water comes off. But the key here is when we have these major water events that we saw in 13, and the way they're projecting now, the Corps, as Leon said, has already begun releasing water down both rivers because they've got to take 3 feet of water off Lake Okeechobee before June 1st. Before June 1st. And there's already forecasted rainfall that states we could be in for another heavy wet season. And if that happens and that lake continues to go, there's no outlet. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no outlet to send the water south. And we build the C-44, we build the C-43, we have the ability to send water south. All of those components work together. But there is comments, there's rhetoric today that says, let's finish the current projects. If we finish the C-44 and the C-43 alone, that doesn't deal directly with the lake water. It's issues with local runoff. It's issues when we have drought. And on our friends on the West Coast, if that reservoir was online today, 220,000 acres of storage, that's primarily used for drought to keep the salinity levels down in the Caloosahatchee. But if that's filled up and it's filled up on this side, and the lake has to be released, where is it going to go? It's coming your way. It's coming your way. So we have to realize the C-44 must be completed. But that doesn't give us the outlet to the south when we have these massive rain events. That's why you have to move water south. That's why you have to have the infrastructure to move water south. Because don't forget at the very far end of this system. We're bridging Tammany Trail. We're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to raise a road that was built in 1928. That when it was built, it decapitated the water flowing into Everglades National Park, which is currently Everglades National Park. So think about all of this in the totality of it all. I know you're dealing with it from Martin County and the Indian River Lagoon, but just try to step back and look at the totality of the Everglades. From Shingle Creek in Orlando, down to the lake, into the central part of the system, and then ultimately Florida Bay. That's how it flowed once before, uninhibited. But now with 20 million people, a dike, our livelihoods, our economy, there's a different flow today. But we can at least restore it to where we're not wasting billions of gallons of water. California's dry, Brazil is dry, there's water crises happening around the world, and we're wasting billions of gallons of water. And listen, this year or next year, we could be told we're on water restrictions. We could have severe drought. And we're going to be scratching our heads saying, how can we be on a water restriction? All the grass is brown, but a short time ago we were spending out billions of gallons out the tide. This doesn't make any sense. We have to convince our leadership and encourage them. Encourage them. They're up there dealing with a lot of issues. This one should be right up at the top of the mind. Clearly the voters thought the same with the passage of Amendment 1. But encourage legislators to understand that this is bigger than any one project. It all has to work together in unison. And in order to have that outlet to the south, we have to have land. And if this deal's not good enough, or if this deal was negotiated in a manner that folks don't like today, then do your own deal. Come up with your own plans. Demonstrate to the public how are we going to solve this, and how are we going to do so in a unified, collective way so that the next generation doesn't suffer the way we have. Because unfortunately, this isn't fixed overnight. We can't flip that switch and say by doing this and doing that, it's over before this wet season. We're in this, folks, for, in a way, the long haul. It's going to be a number of years, a few years here, before we see tangible results when we have these high water events. But the point is, seize the moment. Take the opportunity today to try to fix it. And that's why, from our perspective, the option that's on the table should at least be analyzed, should at least be debated, should at least have the ability to be dealt with or just considered. And again, if it's not good enough, then what's the alternative? That's the question. So I'll conclude, and happy to take any questions that you may have. I caution us not to get caught up together on the details of what we do afterwards. I talked about a reservoir. There's going to be plenty of time to get it right on how best to take advantage of the ability to send water south. There's smart minds in this room who will be able to influence those decision makers. We certainly have some folks that can assist in that regard. But we need the land first. So let's do one thing at a time as we move down the field with an ultimate solution.
Excuse me, Eric?
Sir.
A lot of us have seen this map a lot, but why don't you just explain to those in our audience who are not familiar with it, those gray areas, which is the next available option, which
Sure.
expires in October, the three areas of four.
Sure. You have four parcels of land that expire in October. It's the one I pointed out, and then this acreage over here to the west, including the one down here. That totals the 46,000 acres. The yellow that you see sort of wrapped around the lake is also under option, which would expire in 2020. So that's how this was negotiated a few years back to have various options. Now, it's been said that the willing seller a few years ago is no longer willing to sell. Now, I scratched my head when I heard that because I just, I have a mortgage and I've made a deal with a bank and I have to pay. A lot of us have to pay a mortgage. But if I didn't want to pay, or if I didn't want to, if I was under contract on something I didn't want, I'd have a problem. There was a good faith negotiation. Both sides came to a compromise. A deal was cut. A deal is a deal is a deal, right? So, from the Everglades Foundation perspective, government cannot do this alone, because we don't have really the resources to do it. It would cost, the estimate is $15 billion, $15 billion to clean up Lake Okeechobee, to remove that excess phosphorus. And you're going to hear more about this, but what we're doing is we're going to incentivize the private sector to step forward, because there is a technological breakthrough out there. It's just waiting to be incentivized. It's waiting to come forth. The entrepreneurial spirit of this country, who has solved problems over generations, has to come forth. We have to make sure there's a competitive nature to this to bring this technology forward. So we have announced, and we're going to launch, a 7-year science prize to enable that competition to occur. And if it happens, if in fact we get the technology to remove excess phosphorus from the water, the winner, whether it's a person or a team, $10 million. $10 million. These grand challenges are not new. I mean, you all have canned soup. I didn't realize this until recently. The canned soup was a result of a prize. Lindbergh, result of a prize. So this is what this country is made, and the mayor of Toledo made it very clear to me in Chicago. Government can't do it. We need the private sector, and that's why this foundation has stepped up. That's why we're excited about this. But even with that, we can't lose sight of what we're trying to accomplish today. We got to buy the land.
What could the Rivers Coalition do as an organization? Is there maybe pass a resolution that we can then forward to all of our state and federal?
That's your state.
Yeah.
If I could take a crack at it. Never shy. I think you can all hear me. There is politics involved. I don't want to get involved in that right now. There is serious debate among the owners of the sugar lands who should give up what land regardless of any previous promise. That could be advantageous. Eric has laid down a plan which is simple. Either acquire the U.S. sugar lands per our agreement, or legislature, water management district, Governor Scott, furnish, acquire sufficient land in the EAA, someplace else, that works to a conveyance canal, that works and holds that much water or even more.
So what you're saying is, if not that, identify something else and do it.
Exactly. It's as simple as that. If you are going to consummate the U.S. sugar land deal, tell us where you are going to buy the land for the needed reservoir. And ask that of our members of the legislature. We have one of the most important and all, and Joe Negron. He is a leader. He knows everybody in this room. You all know him. He's in the hot spot right now because he felt sure that that U.S. sugar deal was going to come off, and we were going to have the land to build the reservoir. And something happened along the way to the forum, as that old saying went, and somebody pulled the plug. So the question, pure and simple, with the governor saying very clearly that there has to be storage for Lake Okeechobee south of the lake, which Eric has already spoken to. Okay, where? But just don't sit there and say nice words. Where? Order South Florida Water Management District in 3 months, 4 months to identify sufficient land to hold the water needed to really relieve Lake Okeechobee during high flow periods. I think that's perfectly reasonable request. You can't tell me that there isn't expertise at the Water Management District and in DEP who cannot answer that question probably within 3 days. They know every acre down there. They know that at the southern end, there's worn out sugar land. I asked one of the Crystals people when I drove through there last year, why in the world would you be harvesting cane that was this tall, using nitrogen as well as phosphorus? It was actually mature, being cut at this height. Worthless. Wasn't worth taking it back, but the cost of the fuel for the trucks. The answer was, as long as something's growing, the land has more value. So that's a great American. We'll let that go. I really don't give a damn where the reservoir is. I want a reservoir that can take a minimum of a foot, and I'd like 1.5 feet. Instead of being 25,000 acres, I'd like 40,000 acres, because I know that there's 40,000 acres of worn out land in the EAA.
If I could just make a brief comment on that, I think we also have to be careful not to get lulled into this issue where the C-44, we've got to, that's the solution. It has to be built, it has to be constructed. We get that.
You know, it's almost embarrassing. Just, I'll be honest with you. If I was a congressman from Iowa, looking at the Appropriations Act and seeing a lot of money going to C-43 and C-44, you know what I'd say? What the hell am I spending taxpayers' money on 2 watersheds that are enclosed in counties that flow without any regard into the public waters of the state? I think I can make a very good case that C-43 and C-44 are your responsibilities. We got it in the act by a miracle. So we ought to finish them. But the amount of water coming off Martin County watershed this year is a disgrace. And part of the disgrace is the South Florida Water Management District. I'm in contact with them now, asking them for a land use study to tell me how many acres in the Martin County watershed are vacant. The orange groves are dead, and yet they allow those lands to be drained into the lake when a lot of those permits should be pulled. Why should we, they should be holding the water on their own frigging land. And, but this is a problem we have. I know Kevin Henderson is very much involved in this and very concerned about it. It's really interesting looking at the map of the Martin County watershed is how much active agriculture we still have. It's really very wonderful in vegetables, using a hell of a lot of nitrogen